Good morning, everybody. Time to come in and take a seat and get started. All right, we're very fortunate today to have a visiting speaker, Dr. David French, one of our missionaries that we support from Zambia. I don't want to steal any of his thunder. He's got a lot of great stuff to cover, so I'll just go ahead and let him get started here.
Well, it is great to be with you, and I didn't bring my wife Lori with me this morning. I got up and drove 4 hours. It was a good time for the time to change. By the way, I know it's hot in here, and we were joking earlier that they wanted to make it like Africa and create the right environment here this morning. So anyway, you're welcome. I had nothing to do with it. Anyway, I got up and drove 4 hours to get here this morning, and we got our grandkids with us, and so I didn't think I wanted to get them up 3:30 this morning. So y'all forgive me for not bringing Lori with me this morning. I've had a couple of churches, they said, no, you can't come back next time if you don't bring Lori. So you can not come, but you got to bring Lori. Anyway, and my daughter in Zambia, and they wanted me to be sure to give you greetings. I get up every morning and talk to Zambia. At 4 o'clock I get up every morning, and because they're 6 hours ahead of us here, and touch base, see what's going on. Karen stays in Zambia all the time. Anyway, they wanted me to be sure to give you greetings this morning. We've been in Zambia now for the past 18 years. There are three main parts of our ministry. Before I go any further, should I turn this off? I think y'all can control it back there. Is our primary ministry, but I'm going to spend most of the time talking about that. Go any further, I want to talk about the two so-called humanitarian ministries that we have. The primary school, the Christian school, is kind of a project that my wife Lori is focused on because she's a elementary teacher with her baby, and primary school grades K through 150 students. And our goal here is to provide good quality education. Education is not very good in Africa. It's very, very poorly done. So we wanted to create a school that's going to provide very good academic training, but especially we wanted to provide Christian education. And so we have developed this school trying to provide a good Christian education for the children who live on our campus and in our neighborhood. Our school is the only school for children in our area, a 5-mile radius. There is no school, and this is the only school in that area. So we also wanted to have this school because it's a way to train our Bible college students and their wives so that they can come over into our primary school, and we can teach them how they can be a school teacher, because our students, when they graduate, can go back to their villages where there is no school, and they can start a school in their church, kind of like the one house school from 150, 200 years ago in this country. And they can go back and start a school and provide a great service to the children in their villages, and build relationships with the community and have an influence on the community. But we're also wanting to teach our students and their wives how to do Christian education, how to work with children in a spiritual capacity. It's very interesting to me that African churches really have done very, very little to develop religious education for children. Very few churches have Sunday schools. You know, in Africa, half the kids die before they're 12 years old, and they just kind of don't pay all that much attention to kids until they get to be adults. You know, see how many are going to stay around, I guess. But they, they're age-oriented culture. You know, if we have a dinner on the ground here, we let the kids go through, you know. But in Africa, it's the old men go, and then the men, and the women and children get whatever's left. It's just totally the opposite from us. And so religious education is really an oversight of ministry that in most of the churches, not just Church of Christ, but across the board. So we're trying to train our students and their wives how to work with children and to develop their spiritual lives during those formative years, because I think that's very important. And then also consider the fact that half the population is under 18 years of age. This is a big part of Africa that nobody's focused on. So we're trying to train our students and their wives how to work with children, education, but in religious education as well. And our primary school gives our Bible college students and their wives that practical experience, because in Africa you learn better by doing than you do in a classroom. We teach them, but that's that practical experience that really makes a difference in learning how to work with children. We also have a lunch program or a meal program in our primary school. Half the children of Zambia die before they're 12 years old because, according to the UN, Zambia is the most malnourished country in Africa. And the reason is because they get very little protein. 90% of what they eat is corn. It's just starch, very little protein. And that's why malaria and dysentery kill so many children. It's really because of malnutrition. So we saw that our children coming to our school are coming from some very poor families. They're very malnourished. So we started a meal program. First of all, we started providing lunch, and now we've increased it to breakfast as well. The health of our children has really increased. They're not missing as much school because of being sick. It's just it's increased their academic performance and made a great difference. And it doesn't cost us that much, $12 a day to feed all these children these 2 meals every day. Our school is making a difference in several different ways. Most of the children that are coming to our school are coming from very, very poor families that couldn't afford to send their kids to school. Now, education is supposed to be free in Zambia, but it's not really. Schools have all kinds of fees and stuff like that, and uniforms you have to buy, and poor families can't afford that. And they might afford or force themselves to send their boys to school, but the girls they wouldn't send at all. They just don't have money. They're not going to put money into girls. So we've got a lot of children coming to our school that wouldn't get a good education and wouldn't get any education for that matter. So this is making a big difference in these children that are able to come to our school. And then the fact that there's not even a school within 5-mile radius of our campus. Then a lot of these children are getting a very good education that's going to empower them and equip them when they become adults to get good jobs and better support their families. And Africa needs well-educated people. And this is an area that's being greatly neglected in Africa. Corruption and other things are just stealing from future generations as far as education is concerned. These children are also, as I've already mentioned, getting 2 nutritious meals a day that they would not get at home. So they're healthier, they're less likely to die from malaria or dysentery, and they're going to reach adulthood being in better health. They'll live longer and be able to raise a family and stay alive and support their family, and those children grow into adulthood. And then, of course, this is providing these children a good Christian foundation that will have a major influence on the spiritual development of these children that are coming to our school. And, of course, God is glorified, and it establishes goodwill in our community for our ministry. Let me also talk about the children's ministry that we call Karen's Kids. This is a ministry that my daughter started about 12, 14 years ago, and it's basically she just wants to save the babies, is what she told me about 14 years ago. Because half the children die before they're 12 years old, but as we started looking at it, they're really dying in the first 2 or 3 years of life, and the main reason is because something's happening to the mother. The mother dies in childbirth or soon after, which is very common still in Africa, or the mother is too malnourished to adequately nurse that child. Remember, Zambia is the most malnourished country in Africa. So and then we have a lot of mothers, 25% of the mothers of Zambia have HIV/AIDS, and they shouldn't nurse their children. And they don't have a substitute for mother nursing. They can't afford baby formula, $40, $50, $60 a month. They can't afford cows. You got to have land, or you got to buy feed for cows. They can't afford that, and they don't have that much land. So they just don't have a substitute for it. So if something happens to the mother, or she's too malnourished, that child's in trouble. And that's why so many children are dying before they're 12 years old. They're malnourished. You hear a lot about malaria, but I'm telling you, the real problem is just malnutrition in Africa. That's the real problem that we ought to be addressing. So Karen said, I just want to try to save the babies. So one of the main things she does is provide baby formula to children whose mothers aren't adequately able to nurse the child. She'll provide that baby formula up to 2 years. She also will provide some medical assistance to children who are sick. Sometimes helping them to get an operation, and then she helps some children who have special needs, because Africa does nothing. They don't have enough resources as it is, and children with special needs just don't get any attention much in Africa. And I'm just throwing up a couple of pictures here of some children that Karen has taken on recently. When Karen sent me this picture, I looked at it and I thought, something's wrong with that picture. It took me a day or two until I finally realized what it was. That baby's plump. You don't see plump babies. That baby's on baby formula. I wrote Karen, I said, maybe we better cut back on the baby formula. He's getting too healthy. So this ministry is making a difference. Karen's probably, we don't really know, but 300, maybe more babies whose lives that she has saved, who would have died otherwise without this assistance. These babies that she's helping are much healthier than most of the other children in Africa. They're going to get sick less. They're less likely to die of malaria or dysentery. These children are also able to stay with their families at home. We do not believe in orphanages for Africa. That's a Western idea that's been thrown onto Africa. Africans don't like orphanages, but we Americans seem to love them and think that's the way to go. Listen, there's 50 million AIDS orphans in Africa. We can't build enough orphanages for all those children. And it's expensive. That's not the solution. We need to keep these kids at home. And especially because in Africa, they don't have any safety net. Your family, your extended family, is your safety net. And for children to raise up children who are not part of an extended family is just to send them off into adulthood with nothing, no identity. It's from your family you get your identity and help you when you have needs. And it's just not a good idea to raise kids apart from being in their family, their extended family. So I just don't think that's the answer. We want to keep children in the family. And then we have a real serious problem with teenage mothers. It's hard for us Americans to believe, but women in most of the world do not have control over their own bodies. And I tell you, it gets me really annoyed when I hear all this palaver about women having power over their bodies and all that stuff. And I just think, boy, you know, you just haven't seen the way the rest of the world is. Yes, rape is a criminal offense in most of Africa, but they don't do nothing about it. The police won't do nothing. You know, I have yet to see anybody sent to jail for that. So a lot of girls get pregnant and they didn't have any choice in it. They were powerless. So we got a real problem with this. And just take on the fact that a lot of people in Africa believe that the cure to AIDS is having relations with a virgin girl. Think about that one. So, boy, that's horrible. That's horrific. But we got a real problem. So Karen is helping a lot of babies stay with their teenage mothers in their extended family, and even in some cases enabling them to go on and finish their education. And that's a real problem, but Karen has helped a lot of teenage girls in that predicament. And of course, this ministry glorifies God and helps establish goodwill in our community. Let me spend the rest of my time talking about the Bible College. I have to always watch my time here. I saw they reset the clock. They don't want me going an hour and a half, apparently, so I'll try to respect my time. This is kind of the area that I focus on. You know, Lori's with the primary school, Karen's with the Karen's Kids Children's Ministry, but I'm kind of focused there on the Bible College. We have a really nice big auditorium, 110 feet long by 50 feet wide, and in that building we also have a nice big classroom that's in the, whoops, there it is, in the back of that auditorium where we can have all of our students and their wives in one classroom. Because when I'm in Zambia, I teach all the students and their wives in a combined class. But then we do chapel in that room and other special events, but it enables me to teach. Like when I was there in July, I taught 3 classes to all the students. But then we have a small classroom, a second classroom that's smaller, and then a third classroom in our office building. So that gives us 3 classrooms for first year, second year, and third year students. And then we have a classroom that's for the women, because the wives of our married students have to go through our women's program. And if a man is married, his wife has to come and has to go through our women's program, or you can't go through our school. But we teach these women a whole lot more than just Bible. We teach them a lot of skills and a lot of, sewing and soap making and a lot of things in agriculture. And so that's kind of their own space where we can do all that. A lot of it's practical training. Then we have 30 married student apartments. They're just simple 3 rooms. They don't have indoor bathrooms or toilets or kitchens. That's all outside. And the reason is we don't want to raise their standard of living. Our students come from the bush. We want them to go back to the bush. We don't want to increase their standard of living and ruin them and get them used to city living. We want them to go back home. We have a dorm for our single students, because we do have some single students. So with all our students, and their wives, we have capacity for about 90 to 100 students. We don't want to go any bigger than that, because there's a thing called optimal proficiency. And if you're trying to accomplish quality, you can grow to the point that you lose your quality. And it would sound great for me to come here and tell you we got 300-400 students in our Bible college, because we Americans love to mass produce everything. But we have learned that if you're going to do what we're trying to do, I'm going to explain this in a second, we're focused on quality. And we're at that maximum proficiency, and we're not going to get any bigger than what we already are. Our program is a 3-year program. 75% of our students married. They have to bring their wives that go through our married program. We're now doing a whole lot more in recruiting quality students to our school. We want older, more mature men that are in their 30s and 40s. That's kind of the sweet spot we're looking for. We are recruiting men who are already engaged in ministry, and they have to get recommendations from their home congregations, and then we go out and interview them. We vet them. So we're getting, in the last 5 or 6 years, we're just increasing the quality of the students that we're getting to start with. And then we train them for 3 years. We have developed a good Bible faculty. One guy's agriculture teacher, but the others are Bible teachers, including 2 women that work with the women's program. We have had more than 750 students. I've lost count. I know it's more than 750, but that's a good guess. But the last 4 classes that we have had, because when we moved from our old campus to our new campus in 2015, we totally changed our training program. We learned from the first 10 years, and when we shifted to a new campus, we totally changed the way we do training. It's very different now. And now we're graduating students that I'm proud to graduate. I'm really happy with the quality of the students. We're fixing to graduate our 5th class from our new program here at the end of this month, last Saturday of November. We'll have graduated 5 classes from this new program, and they are the best students we've ever turned out. Now, our school is very different than you're going to find most schools elsewhere in the world, including America. Our school is very different. What makes it different is, first of all, we're focused on the spiritual life and character of our students. We're not just teaching a bunch of information in a classroom. We're not running our students through a curriculum, and then if they pass all the courses, they get a diploma and get our stamp of approval. We will flunk students who don't develop spiritually and aren't what they are. I don't want them graduating and saying, I'm a Daybreak Bible College student graduate. I want to make sure our students are quality. So we will flunk students it's not their grades I'm worried about. It's their life and their character, because we're after quality, all right? So that is very different than any schools you're going to find. We're not a classroom school. What we're doing is far more than what you can do in a classroom. Our mission statement says that we're there to train and develop, let me back up. We're there to train and develop self-supporting spiritual leaders who are equipped for holistic rural ministry. There's three parts to that. We want them to be self-supporting. We want them to be able to do holistic rural ministry. That means minister both to the spiritual and the physical needs of people. And finally, and most importantly, we want to develop spiritual leaders. And that is by far the bottom line. If we don't do anything else right, that's the thing that we want to make sure we get right, and that's what I look at. That's how I evaluate whether we're accomplishing our mission, is the quality of the students who are graduating from our training program. So we have, in the last 14 years, developed an approach to how do you develop the spiritual life. We're talking about spiritual formation. Now, I know some of you don't remember a sermon from 2 years ago, but when I was here last time, I preached a sermon in which I shared these things that we're doing that are about spiritual formation. And I'll just highlight, people need to have a knowledge of the Word of God. They need to take what they learn and put it into practice. Bible or ministry knowledge, you got to give people the opportunity to go start doing it. People learn by doing, especially in Africa. And that's the problem with a classroom-only school, is you don't get that practical training and experience. And then mentoring is very important, one-on-one, what you do with the students outside a classroom and helping them to think through what they're learning in the classroom, one-on-one. I tell our teachers, your most important work is not what you teach in the classroom, it's what you do with the student outside of the classroom, mentoring them, talking about what they're learning in classroom, what they're learning from the Word of God, and how that's going to apply to their own life. And then you've got to help people to develop that devotional life with God, that private devotional time walking with God. And so those are four of the most important things. So we teach them Bible and we teach them ministry by doing it. So we take our students out. We teach them how to be a servant by taking them out and getting them that experience. But we're focused on the life and character of the student. Second, Daybreak Bible College, DBC, trains students to be self-supporting in ministry. We don't want the worst thing in the world is put Africans on American support. I can preach an hour or two on that one from experience. Bad things happen. When you do that, don't do that. It's bad to put people in Africa, preachers, and on American support. We want them to be self-supporting. Another reason, because churches in Africa, most churches in Africa cannot afford a full-time preacher. And yet we have run guys through our Bible college with the expectation they're going to graduate and get a full-time job preaching for some church. And that's the American model, but that don't work in Africa because they can't afford it. So we train these people, graduate them, and they go out there and they become a serious burden to the churches where they go because those churches can't afford them. So we want to teach them to be self-supporting, and the way we do that is through our agriculture training program. So we teach our students how to do agriculture. Just basic agriculture, crop rotation, and different kinds of crops you can grow in their different regions of Zambia, how to do drip irrigation, composting, with raised beds, but especially the drip irrigation, because in Zambia you can grow food year-round if you have water. The problem is in Zambia it only rains 4 or 5 months out of the year, and then they don't get a drop of rain for 7, 8 months out of the year. But they can grow food year-round if they have water. The thing is, they have to walk 3 or 4 or 5 miles to get their water. So we teach them drip irrigation because that's the most economical use of water. If they can get enough water to fill 3 or 4 buckets a day, they can grow enough vegetables to fully feed their family and feed and sell them and even make some money from that. Especially in the dry season, they get fresh vegetables, and we teach them how to grow vegetables that have protein in it, beans, for an example, which will give them protein in their diet. And then we also teach them how to raise chickens. And by the way, when our students come, we don't feed them. I used to do that. I fed them, and then I taught them agriculture, and they went home and they didn't do the agriculture. And I thought, well, why isn't this working? I said, well, because you're feeding them. So I stopped feeding them. It's sink or swim, You come, you're going to support yourself we'll feed you for 3 months until you get your garden going. But once you get that garden going, we're not going to give you any more food. And so for the 3 years that our students are with us, they're supporting themselves. And that's I'm going to tell you what, agriculture is not our most important part of our ministry, but it is clearly the most successful. Our students are going home and they write, and I hear, man, they're thriving. They're making money. Growing chickens and the vegetables and selling fresh vegetables in the dry season, they're flourishing. And many of them are able to use the excess money they have to help support the ministry of the church. So instead of the church supporting them, it's them helping to support the church. And that's the way it really ought to be in Africa. So we're training them to be self-supporting. We also want to train them to do holistic ministry. In other words, to minister both to the physical and the spiritual needs of people. And I want to put with that, the fourth thing is that we train them through practical experience, because the way you learn to do ministry, spiritually or minister to the physical needs of people, is you've got to do it. You got to get experience and do it. And I tell our staff, we're going to give our students so much experience doing evangelism that we're going to rewrite their DNA. So when they go home, they will not be able not to do evangelism. And I'm telling you, it's working. All of our students, whenever they write back, they want to tell all the things they're doing in evangelism. Why? Because they know that's how we train them, and they're trying to say, look, I'm doing what you trained me to do. And then they want to tell me. They want to tell me what they're doing in agriculture and how they're thriving, and then they want to tell me what all they're doing in ministry and evangelism in particular. So we want to train them to do holistic ministry because that's part of our mission statement. And we're doing that because Jesus did it that way. He came preaching and ministering to the physical needs of people. And in Africa, you cannot ignore the physical needs of people and the suffering. People are poor and they're dying and they're hurting, and you just can't ignore that. Now, maybe we can get away with it in a prosperous country like America, but you can't do that in Africa. And in Africa, if your religion doesn't help you with the here and now, it's worthless. So we have to train them to minister to the physical and the spiritual needs of people. And you do that by giving them a lot of practical experience. So we send our students out, and every weekend we send our students out in the surrounding community around our campus. And they go and find a widow whose house is leaking, and they'll rethatch it, or a man who's sick or has HIV and he can't plant or harvest his crops. Our students will plant or harvest his crops. Or someone's sick, they'll walk 5 miles to the pharmacy to get the medicine for someone who's sick, or pray with the sick, just whatever, help fix a bicycle, whatever they can do to minister, because I try to teach them that 90% of evangelism is about building a relationship with people, because it's very easy to convert people in Africa. That's a very small part of it. But 90% of what you do is build that relationship of trust with people. You got to convince them that you are the people of Jesus because you behave like Jesus. Then they'll listen to what you're saying, and you can have a powerful influence on people once you convince them of that. And as I already said, we teach them how to do evangelism. We send them out by bicycle, or they walk. They go into surrounding communities and they engage in disciple-making, evangelism in the surrounding communities. So we're teaching them agriculture so they can support themselves. But one more thing, we're teaching them agriculture also so that they can go back to the village and they can teach the people in the village how they can raise beans with protein and do composting and raised beds and drip irrigation. And that's how Zambia is the most malnourished country in Africa. How do you solve that? You teach them low-cost, low-tech, affordable, sustainable agriculture. None of this expensive UN or USA projects I see all over Africa that we spend millions and millions of dollars and don't accomplish a thing, because when we leave, it all falls apart. You got to teach low-cost, affordable things that they can do. And it can't have computers and technology and machinery. It's got to be low-tech stuff, and that's what we're teaching our students. Well, our students do it, but they go back to the village and they can teach people in their village how that they can grow food year-round and nutritious food. We teach them, as I've already mentioned, teach our students and their wives how to be a school teacher and how to work with children by getting practical experience teaching children in our primary school. We teach them how to work with orphans and vulnerable children by giving them practical experience working in Karen's Kids Children's Ministry. We teach them how to do basic medicine. Most of it is preventive medicine, but there's a lot of things you can do to help people when they're sick in Zambia. We also teach them about marriage and the family. In Africa, they have gone from arranged marriages to love marriages. Y'all don't realize that people in Western culture didn't marry for love until about 150, 200 years ago. We married for kinship and land and security and things like that. We didn't marry for love. In fact, I was reading a book recently. It was talking about how the idea, 200 years ago, the idea of marrying for love was considered abnormal and something was wrong with you. Nobody did that. Today it's the opposite. Nobody would marry if it wasn't for love and romance. We've changed. We just don't realize it, okay? But most of the world's still, in the old world coming into our way of thinking. And guess what? We used to have stable marriages. We don't anymore because we're marrying for love and romance. But see, in order to have love and romance in your marriage, you've got to learn relational skills. And in Africa, they sure haven't learned the relational skills that are needed to have good marriage, loving marriages. So they have the expectation of having love and romance and intimacy, but they don't have the relational skills. I would argue we still have a lot to learn in this too. But they don't, because men still treat their wives like they are a piece of property. The word to marry is the same word as to buy. I buy a tomato, I buy a cow, I buy a wife, same word. And, if your wife doesn't do what you want her to do, you just beat her. That's very common. In fact, I heard some in-laws tell the son-in-law that if their daughter didn't do what she ought to do, he just ought to beat her. The parents said that. I heard them. That's just expected. Well, I'm going to tell you what, women, that doesn't create love and romance in a marriage, does it? I mean, they treat their wife like they're a slave. Well, I'm going to tell you what, the women give it back just as well. I've seen that side of it too. That's more covert, and I won't get into that, but I'll get in trouble. But anyway, so we're trying to teach our students about how do you form good, because they're buying into this new idea. They want to choose their mate, and they want love and romance, so we're trying to teach them from the Bible relational skills so that they'll have a better marriage, and they can go back to the village and they can teach people in the village, especially the younger generation, how that they can have better marriages in the future. So that's how we're trying to train our students to minister both to the physical and the spiritual needs of people, and their practical training, learning to do that. Now, I don't know if you can tell from that list, but we're not a classroom school. We're not like any other school. I only know of one other school in Africa, and that includes denominations in Church of Christ. I only know of one other school that's doing it the way we're doing it. I talk to denominational missionaries, and they hear what we're doing at Daybreak, and they go, really? Man, I wish we could do that. And I say, well, why don't you? Well, our mission board back in America won't allow us to do it. Y'all don't realize how in missions, mission boards rule and control what missionaries can do or not do in these foreign countries. But, we're anonymous, what's the word? Yeah, anonymous is not the word. We believe in congregational form of every church is anonymous, and we have the freedom to adapt, and that's why we're able to figure out what works and do it. So we've been in Africa for 18 years, and I'll tell you, it took us 10 years to figure out how to do it. But we just kept figuring out, well, this ain't working, let's try this, let's try that. It's trial and error. By the way, you learn most from your failures, not from your success. And we've learned a lot from our failures, but I kind of don't know what else to change. It just feels like in the last 4 or 5 years, it feels like, we've kind of reached our stride, and now we're producing the kind of students I always dreamed to produce when I went to Africa 18 years ago. So we're feeling really good now about what we're doing. But this is not the kind of school I went to Africa and thought I was going to start. It's evolved, and it's very unique and very different from the way any other school I know of in Africa. So how well are our students doing with this unique approach that we're doing? So I'm going to give you a few examples from some of our students. There he is, a guy named Lazarus, graduate from 2019. He's ministering for a church that's way out in the eastern province. Whoops, I had a picture I wanted to show you there. Well, it ain't going to do it, is it? Sometimes these things, there it is. Okay. You see I put a green arrow there where Daybreak is located. Well, in these maps, I'm going to show you where the different students are, and it shows you an arrow, DBC, where we're located. But he's way out in the eastern province, and he preaches. Now, in Africa, in churches, you have several guys that will preach. They don't have just one guy who does all the preaching in Zambian churches. But he preaches, but one of the main things he's doing in his church, he's leading the church and doing evangelistic ministries. He's planning to teach his church how to do the agriculture that he has learned. Crispin, graduate from 2020, he and his wife were two of the most spiritual-minded students that we had to graduate, and he's extremely evangelistic. He's working with a church down in Southern Province. They have grown now to about 100 members. Crispin graduated in 2020. He and his wife were, that's the same guy. I'm trying to hurry here. He's raising rabbits and doing his drip irrigation. King Soko, graduate from 2020. He's working with a church way out in the Eastern Province. He's actively engaged in evangelism and community service. I just want you to see that all our students are very engaged in evangelism, every one of them. He is supporting himself through gardening, through drip irrigation. He wanted me to know he's not getting support from anybody and not from his church even. He writes and says, much thanks to the donors for the godly support they rendered to me who want to serve God and win the lost. I am who I am today because God used you to support Daybreak. May God abundantly continue to bless the donors so they can bless others. Moffat, graduate from 2020. He is ministering for a church. I mean, it is way out in a very remote part of Zambia, out by the Malawi border. Very, very far out remote place where he is working. He is very active in evangelism, and his church has been growing significantly. He started doing fellowship meals every month with the congregation, which African churches don't tend to do, believe it or not, but he's doing it because half his church is from Malawi, who are Chewa tribe, and half of them are Bemba from Zambia. He's right on the border, see? They're overlapped there. And these are two tribes that have never gotten along together. And here they are in the same church. I mean, they used to fight and kill each other, traditionally. So, he's trying to build unity across tribal lines. See, racism is called tribalism in Africa, and it is a real problem. He is supporting himself through agriculture. These guys, they all want to tell me they're doing evangelism, and they're supporting themselves through agriculture. He wrote and said that he never thought he would become a minister for God when he started at Daybreak. But he says that he became a totally transformed person at Daybreak. And I love it when I hear them use the word transformed, because that's what we're all about. But he said, I became a totally transformed person at Daybreak and wants to do the same for others by helping them to know who God is and know his mission. Meshach, he is a graduate from 2020. He is from the Northern Province, and I hope he'll eventually go back to the Northern Province because we don't have a lot of churches of Christ up in that area. It's very Catholic oriented. But right now he's working for a church down in Mazabuka in the Southern Province. He's training members in drip irrigation, and he has helped the church because the church is growing. They have now started a building program. We don't give money to churches to build their buildings. They need to build them themselves. It gives them ownership, and a church will grow spiritually if you don't help them with their building. There's sometimes you do if it's in a city because that costs so much to get land or build in a city, but not in the rural areas where our students are. We just don't do that. But they've started a building program, and he wrote and said, I am no longer the same Meshach people used to know before I attended Daybreak, but a transformed person. I have learned the love of God and how to love others. Roderick, a graduate from 2020, he has been living up in the Northern Province, teaching at a Bible college that was started by some folks there, involved in a prison ministry, a radio station that goes all over Zambia. He's very, very engaged in evangelism, and he is one of the most capable graduates that we've ever had from our program, and he's hoping to go to African Christian Bible College down, which is kind of in Swaziland or South Africa, where we have a 4-year Bible program, and get more of a theological degree. And we're hoping that when he graduates in 3 or 4 years, he'll come back and teach for us in our school. So he's working on that. I got 5 minutes, so I got to hurry. Doubt, a graduate from 2021. He's preaching for a church down in the southern province. That church was dying during the time he left there, and he came up to attend school at Daybreak for 3 years. Well, while he was gone, the church almost died, so he's returned. In the last year, he's helped get that church evangelistic and started discipleship programs, and the church has strengthened and grown to the point that now they're starting a new church, trying to build a new church building. And by the way, you notice in these pictures, if you notice the church buildings, they get a tin roof with trees they cut down from the forest, and a lot of them have planks. They're very holy churches because you can see through them. You can see what's going on around you. Just a few planks, sometimes thatch, but you know, they all eventually try to build a church, they call it a proper church building, which they mean out of concrete. But it takes them 10, 15 years to do it, but it's good that they do it on their own. The church grows stronger if they do it themselves. And so they've started a building program. He's supporting himself through drip irrigation and teaching the members in the church how they can do it as well. Martin, a graduate from 2020, he's working with a church down in Monze. He has recently, however, moved out. He started a church in Monze, but now he's moved up to the Copper Belt, where he's working with another of our graduates by the name of Paul Njovu, who's a graduate from 2018. He's preaching for a church way up in the Copper Belt near Congo, and he's spending a lot of time working with youth. Now, in Africa, youth means 20 and 30-year-olds that aren't married. That's what they mean by youth. And so he's working a lot with that age group. He is a very, very hard-working young man, and he supports himself through his growing of vegetables and chickens. He's proven to be, he's thriving in his agriculture, and he's helping to do the work of the church, help support the church ministry through that. Patrick Lungu, graduate from 2020, he is involved in a ministry that's doing counseling to people. He's actively involved in a group of preachers who are going all over Zambia doing evangelistic campaigns and starting churches. Every time I see on Facebook, you know, he's off in here and then he's way over here, and you know, every time I see his Facebook, he's off on a preaching tour doing evangelistic campaign. He's very evangelistic. When he's not off on his campaign, he and his wife are working with a church down in Monze. Oberti, graduate from 2020, planted a new church down in Livingston, right near Victoria Falls by Zimbabwe. Lucas Banda, graduate from 2019, planted a new church in the Eastern Province. That church has just really been growing and thriving. And the last one I'll share with you, our students started a church within the last 2 years at a place called Shimabala, which is 5 miles from our campus. And the reason is Shimabala used to just be a little place with a few shops, a little marketplace. But the government came in and put a toll booth there because it's on the main highway. Zambia doesn't have but 1 or 2 main highways, okay? It's the main highway for Zambia, and they put a toll booth so they can get money from everybody driving down up the road, okay? Well, they put the toll booth at Shimabala. Well, now that town's just mushroomed, and because when people have to stop, you know, they end up stopping to buy stuff and lunch or something to drink. So it's a really fast-growing little community, and it's only 5 miles from our campus, so our students have been going over there on the weekends, and they started a church. Well, lo and behold, one of the members that they converted, it was a very prominent man in the community, and we didn't realize how important he was until he died about 2 months ago. And when somebody really important dies, it's not just a family affair, it becomes a community affair. And so the chief and the elders of the village township there asked our students to do the funeral. So our students did the funeral, and it was about 1,000 people that showed up for that funeral, which just kind of shows you the influence that our students now have established going out serving and doing ministry in our community. And that means a lot to me because it means I'm teaching my students how to do good ministry. They're being a blessing and gaining influence in the communities. Let me tell you why it's so important that we be doing this work, why we be training leaders in Africa. You may or may not be aware, but the gravitational center of Christianity has moved from a northern, western hemisphere to the global south. And now in missions, everything is about the global south because that's where Christianity has moved. And notice there are 700 million people in Africa that claim to be Christian. That's more than any other continent in the world. All right? Now, you can compare that to the Western world where church attendance is about 200 to 250 and it's declining. But in Africa, we have twice as many people going to church on Sunday than we have in all of North America and Europe combined. And we now have more churches of Christ and more members of the Church of Christ in Africa than we have here in the United States. And in 30 years, they're now predicting that Africa will have 1.3 billion people claiming to be Christian. That is twice as many as any other continent. The problem is when you got that kind of explosive growth, you got a big problem. How in the world do you train enough good leaders for all those new Christians? There's our problem. And that's what our school is dedicated. We're going to do what we can to train good leaders for Africa. I'm out of time. I got to skip a couple of things here, but if you want to know how you can help with the children's ministry, the primary school, or the meal program, or endowment fund, there's some brochures back there in the back you can pick up that tell you how to do that. Or you can just go to our web page. There's a big yellow button there, donate. You can donate to different ministries on our web page, ZambiaMissions.org. If you want, as an individual, want to help children, we don't have a lot of overhead. You know, it goes straight to helping kids. So if you want to help with that, there's a brochure back there you can pick up. I want to close by just thanking the congregation for helping us to make a difference in Africa. Africans are saying that one day they're going to be sending missionaries to America. They hear what's going on in America. Every time I'm over there, they ask me, what kind of crazy stuff's going on in America now? And I just shake my head, I don't know. Well, they said, we're going to be sending missionaries to America one day. And they may very well. They're already doing it to Africa. I'm out of time, but I'm just telling you, Africans are moving to get jobs in Europe, and they're planting churches all over Europe now. One day, they may be doing it here. I got to stop. Thank you all.